It's British-based in Oxford, if I'm not wrong. But the important thing being that it's become wildly famous, especially among the youth, right? Western youth grown up with essentially mostly video gaming and this kind of almost obsession, compulsive desire for information about the data, the details, the facts, about what they think. So, for a reason or another, is the most interesting or important or relevant, aspect of warfare altogether. And I would like to start by saying, first of all, that I have a very positive opinion of Osprey Publishing, that I own myself an enormous collection of these books. I don't know, I've never counted them because I got them all en masse. So it's in the range of the thousands. This, as I'll explain later, also makes me access them in ways that is a bit independent from the series. So I don't really have a bias towards a series or another. Basically, all this content is split in different series that have to do with different approaches to warfare. Like it can be the aforementioned Men at Arms, or I don't know, Command, or Order of Battle, or things like these. And it's very varied. This is the fascinating thing about that. And there is in general, I think I've heard it happen to me at university, or speaking, with people that legitimately had, maybe wanted to know something more, wanted to access a more scientific, like a more academic-like material, like the Osprey, but those are kind of those booklets, right? That I remember when I was a kid, I have some physical ones, because when I was a kid, I presume still today they came out in together with other, I don't know, lead soldiers, collections, things like that. And I used to read them when I was a kid. Some of them were very nice. I was mostly impressed, as I guess most people, even in the question was turned to me, was was the thing about the illustrations, right? And that are very beautiful, very colorful, very detailed, actually, and very accurate, historically speaking. And I would like to, in fact, stress also that this content is, generally speaking, good from a historical point of view. At this point, I have some qualification to speak from, and I must say that no, this is not kind of lesser material if one wants to approach history of warfare. It's actually very good, and it has the merit of having, first of all, at this point, a thorough, really not completely, as we'll see now, but it covers an enormous range of topics. Right at this point, I don't know how many they made out, because they publish so much. There are these series that are kind of the most famous, but then they publish also novels, based, war-themed novels, historical context, also some, war games guide, things like that. I'm not very interested in those. Like the novels, I'm not really. I'm more for the real thing. But of course, if there is a historical base that can be interesting to many, you can learn history in part also like that. And it covers this astonishing variety of topics. Not all the ones you would like to see, but surely they made progress in this sense. I've never tried, but I know of people that have actually suggested some topics and they saw them published. I may propose something and maybe even contribute myself, because there are things that I think are important and I specialize in, and that they didn't publish, and that would be, I'm sure, very interesting for many, about medieval warfare mostly. And also, they are good because they are a very good summary, right, of the things that come useful when you need to search for, to get a reliable information quickly, right? A datum, an info, a certain specific source reference, mostly. At the end of this booklets, there is always naturally a bibliography. That is what that is based on scientific publishing that you can access, and therefore, if you want to know more, just there is no excuse at this point in history, right? Lots of people ask me, what can I read to understand this better in history? My answer is always, go back, start from maybe yeah, even Osprey can be good if you want to start to get the references for something, but then you have to make the next step, that is to get into academic publications and studying sources and having certain specific competence that you can build over time. So first of all, I know by fact up to a couple of years ago that the Osprey, as other publishing, etc., hasn't been about military history specifically, hasn't been living maybe the best of its times. Like, people tend to read less, maybe, or to read only certain types of things, and you can see how also in Osprey there's been an adaptation to this in part, which is not entirely, it's not bad actually, because actually the Osprey quality has increased over time, but there is also a certain specific goal that you can see there that is very it's very tested. It's very based on the popular tastes of mostly this millennials, historical video gamers, say experience that has marked the interests, the biases, the attraction towards certain specific topics. Not just children, but also adults are often attracted more by pictures rather than by actual intellectual content. Not that pictures, again, are not useful. Actually, they make a good work, because together with that comes, as we've seen, reliable information. So my advice, as for any publishing, is if spend money for it. Like if you I know that we mostly tend not to, in general, to say, okay, well, I can't get info now for free through other channels, through other sources, etc. So why should I buy something? Well, the question is this: if you want to see more stuff like that, pay for it, right? That's the only way to keep the market, the production going, a florid market in existence. And if you're not willing to do it, well, that sector will die. If you wonder why people are, generally speaking, completely ignorant about what properly military history is, or war is in the first place, well, it is largely because they're not interested in it, and they don't make the effort to learn it. It's that simple, like for most things. And the reasons are interesting to study, but today we don't talk about that. Today I would rather like to discuss what are the pros and cons, like to understand that, yes, this is a useful tool, but as I was asked at some point, can I essentially just go by this and without further complications? Well, the reason is obviously no, right? You can't. Osprey is not made, it's not conceived specifically to provide you with all a certain set of premises, of context, of knowledge and tools and properly capacities to eventually approach military history the right way, right? I made videos, the right way meaning the serious one, properly the academic one, the scientific one, that is the only one that by our own civilizational standards is the one that allows you even to write an Osprey booklet, by the way, because the authors are good, the info is good, right? But it's just you cannot condensate in a booklet what is needed to properly understand much better the broader thing. This volumes are conceived essentially to give you, again, that very well summarized and explained and nuanced set of information, the core information about a given topic that naturally varies in quality and in type, etc., depending also on the authors, because authors come literally from all over the world. I know some in person, and I know what's their historiographical background, and you can see in the eventually how this is reflected in those works. And there are mistakes. Yes, there are mistakes, and this is not Osprey's fault, meaning that at that point they rely on scholars, and these scholars make mistakes because they don't have enough background or whatever, the ones they have found, etc. The publishers are not the historians, right? So it's not their job to verify eventually the background that should be properly understood to evaluate the historical information that the scholar they call is going to write down, that they trust them, right? And I repeat it most of the times, it's really good work, right? There is a lot there, and there is naturally in parallel a let's say even in their historiographical development. We'll talk about this more now, meaning that certain things that are written in those booklets can figure in a serious historiography. In a serious bibliography. I, for example, used some Osprey my PhD thesis in bibliography. Just very small information. Mostly was actually referring to the fact that somebody had written in an Osprey talk about certain topics in an Osprey. In that case, I was even being critical of it. But still, if I need a quick reference to, I don't know, a specific, military context in time and place, these booklets are, I don't know, French medieval armies 1000 1300, right? And if you want to know more or less something, about the iconography, the context, some archaeological evidence, what were the most important battles, what you can learn, you can open that. It's maybe just 60 pages, 90 pages. There are a lot of illustrations, etc. But you have that reference with you, right? And naturally, the more you have, the more you can integrate this. And that's why it's so damn useful. And in particular, I have most of this stuff, as I was saying before, digitalized, which means that I can make very quick searches. I don't hide that. On Schwerpunkt, I abundantly used this, Osprey info, like for the sake of reference in general. Then I have mostly other type of books, but this one is like, if you want to relate, it goes into fair detail to present some kind of, of evidence that eventually you can comment on, criticize, that was starting from to make a further point. Right, so it's that useful, and it's particularly good, really, for everybody, right? So it's at those levels that really the university researcher and the complete newbie that approaches history, even not just the military one, can benefit from in different degrees for different purpose, and so on. Now, talking about what. First of all, the quality in general. Over time, I don't know when they started for the first time. I think in the 80s or the 90s was already there. In the 90s for sure. But I was addressing the topic when discussing the last video I made about HEMA in response to scholarly authority, that true Osprey that is very popular, so it's very bold thing, and there is properly you can measure, right, through the topic, the choice, etc., what kind of the popular interest is revolving to, is shifting towards, right? And there are some broader philosophical considerations that I disagree with in the way they produce. I mean, it's all good. Like, as long as they keep making stuff, it's good, right? Even if there is a strong bias, for example, towards a time and space, and they don't cover else, that's good. It's always good to have something in the first place, right? But there are also certain things you have to be careful about. I remember in the first the first volumes. I remember one. There were wars. There's no way around it, right? I remember especially one was about the army of Austria-Hungary during the 1800s. First of all, there was not even properly Austria-Hungary, etc. But the info was collected in a way you understood that there was just a guy sitting there gathering some broader information about the period and the kind of maybe major battles, but not quite going in depth about. But probably maybe there are linguistical barriers. There are historiographical barriers at the time. It wasn't even, like not even the internet was there, of course, to provide dramatic help the way it does now for all the stuff that isn't there. So naturally, even finding information at the time was more difficult, and I can understand why the quality was so. But there was a broader point to that is, as I was saying in that other video, that fundamentally the interest for the philosophy, the interest, the work behind Osprey at the time seemed to me to have been mostly something stemming from mostly a British, and again, there's nothing wrong with that per se, but it was essentially a British bias towards fundamental and on a special political and social bias. That is to say, at the time, there's a lot of wargaming background, I presume, at some level behind these things. A lot of people were interested in military history, but they did in some from some backgrounds that were fundamentally mostly about, I don't know, from that British perspective, I don't know, the Napoleonic era, right? And mostly all the the various regiments of British Army and that specific detail and whatever they did. Then instead, if you're talking about the the Habsburgic army, at that point, it was something, right, much more mythologically explained rather than factually or nuancedly done. They started covering those topics, and probably at some point they realized that they could find more competent people, more experts. They could gather more information, so the quality started improving. But at the beginning, there was this markedly, mostly, yes, all what could concern the 100 Years' War, the English Civil Wars, the Napoleonic era, World War I, World War II, in that specific, again, British background. That was not just a British background with one of the 80s, the 90s, where people fundamentally looked at military history in a very different way they do today. Right at the time, it's essentially some guys that are really passionate about warfare because mostly there is something about their own country's memory or mythology or familiar background that participated maybe to those wars, etc. And therefore they wanted to kind of remember, honor, were keen especially about that. This is something you can't find especially among older people that pass down these things eventually also to the generations. There are very strong national biases in many countries still in this regard, so that what is about that country is worth being known in detail, because the majority of people naturally that buy the thing comes from there, and therefore and while the rest is kind of who cares, right, because we've never heard it, right. And I understand that this is a market policy that you have to sell stuff, but at the same time, for people who approach maybe the series and come from another background from which they don't effectively also have not, as it happens, right, outside of the Anglosphere, they also haven't quite known much about the rest of the world, maybe even about the country next to them, or about their own, by the way, which is somewhat sadly even more, sadly even truer. And this is valid really for any country in the world. Here we're going by relative terms in degree. The bias is passed on, right? And therefore you can find everything about, I don't know, it's legitimate. As I was saying before, I'm glad about that. I personally have built and made myself a culture about British warfare, American warfare. But again, you may have like in detail all the various battles of the English Civil War, but then maybe a major battle in low medieval Holy Roman Imperial history from Germany, from Italy, or I don't know, from France, from Spain, or other countries. It's people haven't even covered. I haven't even gone for looking at, and big events, not just small ones. And this unfortunately has to do, as I was saying before, also with the culture of the authors that they call to eventually write history at the same time, because a certain battle can be, for example, popular in a certain country and obscuring, for example, maybe more important ones for reasons of local tradition or perception, or in fact, I measure it myself, right? As I was saying before, I've come at this point to stress, to almost to shut out the fact that we have gotten something wrong, even probably in Western European warfare during the 13th and 14th century, because nobody has studied in perspective or in comparison certain countries' military histories that haven't properly gotten the factual dimension of certain dynamics that were going on, and I demonstrated it, and I will keep publishing stuff at this point, I hope also in English, because that's also quite profitable in a sense. And but again, I see people who I say it because there is a specific battle I studied among the others in my thesis that has been actually described in a very recent Osprey, and that is wrong. And why it is wrong? Because the guys who wrote it just looked at the pre-existing historiography. They didn't make any research on their own, even on edited sources, and therefore there are lots of people out there that read this thing, got the battle wrong, and maybe they even tell you, no, because I read the Osprey, it says that. The Osprey doesn't actually provide you. This is the sad aspect of that. We'll see with, like, for many publications in general at this point, given the hyper-specialization that is taking place in universities worldwide, and believe me, the actual academic quality in the world is sinking. You cannot rely on, especially if we're talking about military history, let's not even address it, but let's say this narrowing down of the perspective that has become almost in a first-person shooter sense, right? And that's also why Osprey began to say, even to say, okay, let's not say too many things at once, but even the same illustrations let's show you what the perspective of the guy on that field. It's just an illustration, right? But they felt the need to do it because they know that kids today don't even give a shit about the collective dimension of warfare is effectively the thing that is most important, but they care about how, that guy is equipped, man, what kind of weapons it used. I was just, re-uploading the Varangian Guard video now. Actually, now I uploaded, wait a second, because it finished elaboration, and I was searching for pictures of the Varangian Guard, of my new search of non-copyrighted pictures, and people like Varangian Guard, the first thing that comes out on YouTube, what weapons they had, what armor they had. Like, aside from the fact that was more like of an army rather than the stereotypical, foot guard with so-called Danish axes that kids have watched in video games, and they think that it's the coolest or strangest, most unique thing in the world, and maybe they have no idea why. Not just how many other troops existed in the Byzantine army also kept like that, or how many other peoples in the world did the same thing. But properly, there is this idea that you have to be obsessed with the individuality of warfare. That is literally the single least important thing in all the history of warfare, except from positions of command. There is an interesting series, Osprey series, that is about command, in fact, and that's very much appreciated, but even in there I have some warning I have to give you for. And I don't remember where I was coming from with this, but there is this problem, I guess, that, in the absolutely remarkable initiative, because no other publishing fundamentally does that. Some magazine does this, but they're smaller. Their editions are more sporadic. They are actually more special, more theme based on certain topics rather than it's, for example, either just World War II or maybe just the Germans, for example. Osprey really covers everything, so that's the good thing. That's the thing that really opens your mind, because you see other stuff, you want to learn more stuff, and therefore you acquire more. But one aspect in this sense that would be great for a new Osprey series would be an historiography series, right? Why is that? Because, again, we have problems about the way history is told properly that change every day on the basis of the new evidence of new, dialogue, confrontation, learning, etc. That, as I was saying before, for example, if there had been, an Osprey to explain for why the aforementioned battle or its context or other or similar battles were not studied particularly well yet, and why there is this, how the quality of the work could be, in fact, altered. And you understand that this is an economical policy if you want to make, but it would be interesting because, we have to come to terms with the fact that still, World War II will not be entirely written, of course, but just we miss, for example, dramatically, structurally, systematically, the sources of one of the major contenders, the Soviet Union. Russian archives have been opened very, very gradually, with very few information coming out since the 90s. And literally, the more we study about that, the more we need to fix certain details, right? This is not nothing ideological. I mean, in part there is something ideological as well, right? There were certain things we thought the Soviets did or didn't that instead wasn't the way we have pictured them stereotypically. But literally here it's properly operational history. That is, there are other data on losses and things. I found the same problems actually on certain specific books that were more storytelling, that were quite biased, that was specifically about the SAS. It was, I don't remember the title, I read it a couple of years ago, and it was like a gross mythological hymn to essentially this group of troopers, historically based, but completely, in fact, mythologized, exaggerated, without any criticism, for example, how to handle the numbers, stereotypes about peoples that were expressed by these troopers that fit the general bias that exists in some country. I mean, if you had actually even just done a research to understand the thing from a tactical, strategical point of view, you would have made a much better book, right? And instead you didn't, because you had to sell this to a bunch of nationalists fundamentally that wanted just to hear that their heroes killed people in disproportional numbers, and maybe that they don't even know what the sources of those operations are. And this is the serious thing I have, the serious problem I have with lots of publishing. This is not just about Osprey. It's not their fault, because they make so many things that, of course, this bad apples appear every once in a while. So again, it's not fault. I'm extremely thankful to own my Osprey collection. I was saying before, I have a very positive opinion, especially for spreading info, from disclosing, for making properly the non-experts learning. It's fantastic, right? But at the same time, you cannot say therefore is okay when certain things also are grossly wrong, and you understand that not just probably anybody checked, but also that there was properly the will at some levels of the decisional level that was to say, okay, let's make this chauvinistic boutade, so that people who believe those things are going to buy that specific volume. This is not true for any other Osprey volume I've read. And I was interested in the SAS because, frankly, I would have liked to know very well, knowing there are lots of other booklets about SAS that was fantastic. This was more like a novel based on history rather than instead the ones about. I think I read something else about SAS that was very good, right? So I have no problem with that. It's just I had a problem with that specific author who wrote that specific thing, right? And this, as I was saying before, the publishers may not entirely realize, right? Even if I think that at the end of the day, you know what you're publishing, and certain things are, even if should make you wary of the fact that things could go, may not be exactly what you thought. Like, things could surely be improved, right? So I think an historiographical background would be, in terms of understanding more than else what was the bias that existed before in historiography, and then what naturally new acquisitions have made us understand. And I think this is very interesting because it can also orientate the reader's interest towards certain things, certain periods, certain times that are overlooked, and the reason why we have overlooked them. So not just playing on their own pre-existing bias, but kind of engineering one right towards a more positive goal, and therefore also maybe increasing the quality of certain volumes accordingly, because you have already given a certain background that helps to understand them. Maybe this is asking too much, right? I understand that there is mostly an anxiety to cover in detail, right? And this reflects largely the academics, the academic trends more than standards, because as I was saying before, academic standards are sinking, right? But this is a problem that I think exists generally. Once, for example, I was reading an Osprey I don't remember about what specifically, I think it was about German engineers of the Wehrmacht, or something like that. And I don't know. I could easily get wrong with this, but I was, for example, very disappointed. I think it was a Men-at-Arms from the Men-at-Arms series, because, for example, it concentrated not on how just these troops were employed factually and, providing some more examples of that, but, listing, I don't know, what kind of, German brand of chocolate or cigarettes they would have with them. Like, what the hell do I care? I mean, even if, because it was disproportionately long, right, as an information, and you know that, Ospreys are also cool because they're designed, they're I don't know, usually 60, 90 pages, depends, but I think they're designed to be read just like in one day. Like, if one day you want to relax and say, okay, I'll read an Osprey, like, in a couple of hours you can profitably finish one, and still, I'm kind of anxious to finish it in that regard as anything that I begin to read. And if you're keeping me, when I want to know specifically something military historical, when you tell me something just from a background that effectively is not, I understand that there is culture behind that as well, but it's, again, disproportionate sometimes. It's just descriptive of, what these guys would eat or consume, and not really how this, for example, affected, I don't know, it would have been interesting, like more a history of the shortage of such stuff in specific operations, supplies and so on, rather than giving me in detail, like, again, even the brand of which meat the, in tents do the word, they can't do the word eat and consume, like, but it can't be a detail you give here and there, but you don't make so much at the expense of a tactical analysis, right, an operational analysis, that in that case would have been particularly interesting. Also because it was that was properly a unit, it was quite invested in specific tasks, and it would have been interesting to exemplify more. But just my criticism, for example. So this idea that, however you understand it, behind that work there was a so-called expert that actually was stuffing the volume with the text with information that hadn't to do with that tactical operational background, means that the guy doesn't study that much, doesn't attribute that importance that much. And you understand here the broader plague that affects the academy today. That is to say, we don't really have true historians of the art of war, right? Study properly military history and art, and have a strategic culture. It becomes mostly about describing, stereotyping, picturing the type of trooper. That's also for the question that was posed about the Men-at-Arms series, without maybe going too far in terms of what, the context of this, the particular unit, the particular tactical or strategical employment and its implications really meant. It's like when they make, I don't know, there is this other series that came out recently that is about, it's called Duel, if I'm not wrong, that I could understand for, I don't know, planes, right? Even if every plane is different, there are different contexts, etc. That, normally, you can't think about the typical Spitfire versus Messerschmitt, right? That's, I don't know, the Battle of Britain, that classical topic. But if you're, and it's it already requires some capacity there to contextualize, to dimension the problem, to explain that you can't quite compare certain, apples to oranges. And when you get, a type of dual volume, when you compare a skirmisher to a line infantryman, that I can understand, right? They are two humans fighting in given context, where, I don't know, if there is guerrilla, it's more likely to see such a thing. So I understand. But the thing gets down at that point to just analyzing that specific trooper characteristics, and again making this, now show you the perspective of, the guy from the field, from one side, from one another. You're just maintaining the reader in that kind of FPS decontextualized dimension without explaining the major political and strategical implications for which two contendants like those would meet in a certain ground, and how, with which result, or given some background on how properly, not just how they were equipped, but properly what could be their moral background, for example, their motivation, the the military tested proof of such capacity, right? Usually, these booklets maybe do come handy, right? But I was reading other stuff about, I don't know, the what was that? Was the Viking warrior versus the Anglo-Saxon warrior, right? In the way it was not badly written, right? If you really want to get the essentials there, you can get it. I know it's thought provocative. It's cool to think about the thing, but again, in order to present these two guys, what they normally do, they describe the equipment of two guys, then they analyze a bunch of battles in which actually the whole army, so not necessarily the typical guy, also in terms of tactical segmentation or organic composition was, and making a general analysis that goes between, that ends up at the end of the day being a broader strategical thing, but without having really connected how the individual guy in that sense was. And part of the reason why this is the case is that, for that example, how many differences do you want really to find between a Viking warrior and an Anglo-Saxon warrior in the 10th century? I mean, concretely, right? Of course, there are, right? There is all a background that you have to illustrate there, and they did succeed in it. But at the same time, like, wouldn't this whole thing be better if brought, for example, a broader level of strategical analysis, operationally speaking, for which maybe a booklet is not enough, right? But that would stimulate maybe better that kind of understanding of why these guys would confrontate each other in the first place, and understanding also through the sources how factually all this attention towards the alleged differences in the way they fought, especially by medieval standards, technological potential was ridiculous. What kind of differences do you individually do you want to properly have, right? And you would observe that, again, it's mostly about command, it's about strategic context rather than what the differences about this type of troopers would be. But now, because kids today want to see that, they are obsessed with what would be like the deadly warrior style stuff, would win between one of these two guys. Osprey really doesn't make that because it's a serious thing, but at the same time, I think it could philosophically frame it better, could contextualize it better, could teach these kids that approach is really not what it takes to develop really a strategic education, and that therefore would render also this analysis kind of not I can say and with an end to themselves, but almost, right? And that's another thing. Then easily, as I was saying before, there are so many different contexts to cover that I think could be really easy to do. For example, in my master thesis, I studied a German battle that is basically is the largest battle in medieval knights ever happened, right? It's also a major event in the rise of the Habsburgs and the defeat of the Permislets, etc. It's like a big thing. The truth being that about this battle, aside from a few guys at the beginning of the 20th century, one guy 700 after the battle in the 70s in Austria, and then me in my master thesis actually wrote about this stuff, right? And it's incredible because at that point you understand that Europeans do not study their own history, like basically no other people actually has, by any stretch of the imagination, by average educational standard, what their own history is about, and that if you really looked even at some lists of main battles in history, like that are even published by similar, like there is the War Games Research Group's thing list, is also nice, etc. You would know that they existed in the first place, but nobody ever wrote about that. Probably at some point they will make a booklet about that battle, and I don't know, I wrote just 260 pages about it. It's not this dramatic match, but I know that I would like to have had more than what probably will be done in an Osprey series volume. And my perplexity is also that I understand there is a target, I understand there is a market out there, but you have also to understand about the consequences of this, which are surely positive overall, but they may be fueling some specific unawareness, not to say ignorance, and the reasons why that ignorance exists. They are not just, that guy simply doesn't know because he lives in a vacuum, but maybe doesn't know that because lives in an environment that hasn't effectively provided a satisfactory education or historical culture or interest. And so we are all responsible when we make stuff. I try to cover, for example, in Schwerpunkt, all I know, first of all, so that I, at least within the limits of my own competence, I try to cover everything I can address, right? And with a certain level of detail. Because I know there is other stuff, and people like that, right? It would be a way to also fill certain gaps, right? Because if you made a video about those unknown battles, people would flock to you. You would be the first one that made that, right? And you would extend the appreciation also towards your own material. So I don't know. I can't recollect. I can't, let's say, reconcile the. I don't know whether it's the primitiveness of our world historical awareness with certain specific economical, say, market policies, target policies for publishing that here sometimes do not work. And also, I got the impression in general that when Osprey publishes something about a certain foreign context, foreign, as we've seen, out of the broader Anglosphere perspective, and say, okay, let's make a book, I don't know, about the history of that battle, I don't know, in that country, because we know that in that country, people, generally speaking, know what we're talking about, and therefore they would appreciate that, and that's our specific target. Well, I would like exactly to understand, for them to understand before why, for example, people in that country like the thing so much, and to compare it with, however, what there is beyond that as well. And in fact, there are certain enormous gaps that are left open, right? Considering that they started talking, for example, medieval history is the one I know best, especially from a military historical point of view. This is the point. They usually make iconic stuff, right? And there are huge gaps left, right, that legitimately can't be because of a barrier of language as well. Like if you don't know, I don't know, you want to treat a battle in Moldovan history, you don't know, you don't know even where to start to search for a bibliography. But at this point, we are like in 2021, you can ask, I don't know, Moldovan scholars for that, and if they speak English, and as they presumably do, satisfactorily at that level, you can easily access a certain background making something like of that kind. And I understand you may spend money, may invest time and resources to maybe invest in a sector. I've never heard Moldova being named. if not, maybe some tiny other in history that wasn't about properly. I don't know why I fixed with Moldova now, but just that's, for example, something that existed and that still nobody kind of cares very much about. And it's kind of sad. Like when I make a video here about something that is very niche, if you want, but you realize that those were people at the time. They had their own history, their own tradition. They were active, that things happened. And of course, even if they were less documented, there were less sources, whatever, we know less proper, but this is not a valid reason for saying, okay, let's simply invest in something that people will buy them. Because I try to expand the boundary. So I know, maybe it's anti-economical, maybe I'm losing something myself because of that. I see that there are certain videos that make more views for the same reasons that I'm talking about now. That's my leitmotif now at this point. But I keep doing everything because I know that, I presume that comprehensively that's more important, that's stronger, that gives more confidence and more sense of reliability to my side, towards my side, that is a higher investment, right? So I have no idea what's the economical, coming back for this. Or whatever. I just know that in practice, however, there are lots of things that are left out that eventually correspond to these dynamics. They're not just random. They played at the, roulette and that thing came out. No, it's wanted. Um, Regarding the question that was posed, the Men-at-Arms series, generally speaking, is good, right? I think there is a good, the guy was asking me, I don't know if it's a boy or a girl, but the question, say better, was asking, you know, I am attracted mostly to the pictures, and maybe therefore this makes me biased towards the quality of the information. No, the quality of information is good, right? It's just that the Men-at-Arms series in this regard has that aggressive character saying, look, this is that type of warrior, man. That's the guy that you have to project all your fantasies on, because that's the core, right? It's like saying, yeah, typical Men-at-Arms series, in fact, mirrors the term Men-at-Arms from, medieval soldier, let's call them, in fact, Men-at-Arms. That's why you call them. Equates knight, aside from the dubbing or whatever. So the heavy guys, etc., on the field. But again, if you extrapolate the Men-at-Arms from its army, the Men-at-Arms gets annihilated, right? The Men-at-Arms cannot work in the field without infantry, without missile troops. It carries out certain tactics. How is that? Is it trained to perform them, and why, etc.? So, for example, now that I think about it, I wouldn't like to be wrong, but there is not an Osprey series called Tactics, right? I have a series about tactics on Schwerpunkt, and it's cool because it tells you fundamentally how certain armies fought concretely. And on Osprey, I haven't found anything like that. There is generally either, in fact, the Men-at-Arms that encompass, generally speaking, a bit of army organization and tactics as well into the broader equipment of the guy, but specifically tactics per se of a specific army in a specific moment in history. Yes, there is, but I think it's confined mostly to World War II, like to modern, to contemporary warfare in general, because say, what were it, and it mostly focuses, and at that point it's understandable also because, like, first of all, we know more, of course, about tactics, and there are certain specific ones that were employed, etc., and they are traceable, but I suspect it tends to be towards small unit tactics, right? That is not to say that, of course, those are not important, because you have to fight through them, and then eventually the bigger thing passes through. But this passes through eventually to all together for the larger levels of organics. But I don't know. I don't think there is an Osprey that deals with a specific, medieval Russian tactics, like I made video myself on. There is maybe the Battle of Kulikovo. There are other books that tell about, the Russian army at the time, armies at the time. They cover that. Yes, well, the army organization, yes, there was the army organization specifically. But with tactics, I don't remember that. So that's important, for example, properly from a conceptual point of view, because if you habituate the reader to think that there is just a fixed type, for example, of army and trooper, and then yes, tactics are just a bit side dish that tells you, yeah, this guy's more or less fought like that, but it doesn't show you factually or systematically in a broader, conceptualized, and comprehensive version of all the broader encounters that they had. Tactics, in fact, out then the single volumes on specific battles that do not reference to one another, that are written by different authors, etc. You don't have a comprehensive understanding of that. And armies are made to fight, so it can't be just that vague in practice. But, you understand that I'm being harsh in this judgment, because, again, it seems as if I dislike the series. I don't. I like it, but because, again, I can find a lot of info, but I personally would like to see more of that, because there is a military logic and a strategic substance in properly understanding that if you organize an army, it's to obtain to employ it in a specific way. And until you don't see it properly employed, right, you can't quite understand why it was for. Naturally, the fact that there are different authors doesn't help. Authors are as I was saying before, can be more or less inclined. You understand from the way they write towards a specific aspect of warfare or not. What about illustrations? Well, illustrations are very good, as I was saying before, but even in there are some mistakes here and there. Some are just physical. Like sometimes you see things you can't, I don't know. I remember there was a beautiful depiction of an engagement, the Battle of Kursk, and you saw clearly a guy picking up, an artillery ammo that was evidently it was too large. It wouldn't fit the caliber of the barrel, and that was so evident in the picture. Then you said, well, but the guy who made this in ultra detail wouldn't notice that specifically. Other mistakes are more conceptual, and I don't know about this, is whether it's because of illustrators' faults, or if illustrators, as I have known by talking by one, are properly told to represent certain things rather than others. Illustrators are always are very actually good. They're some of my, the people that I appreciate the most in general, because they're mostly also very open people. Normally, some are a bit more haughty, like they don't even care, but maybe they don't like critique. I never criticize them directly, but I know of people that they must harass them also with this notations of pseudo-historically competent people, etc. But for example, I remember one scene of it was an 100 years war battlefield. I don't know, it could have been Crécy, it was probably Crécy, where you could see essentially a line of longbowmen literally taking down horsemen, heavy cavalry in front of them, just like imagine 5 meters away, with nothing in between. Right, maybe some sticks, some poles, as they entrench themselves in between, but fundamentally giving the exact image of a longbowman line would literally take down heavy cavalry in front of them, so effectively stopping a cavalry shot. That's absolutely anti-historical, it didn't work like that, right? Those tactics functioned by combined tactics, and normally longbowmen wouldn't properly be charged or placed in a position where they would had to withstand a cavalry charge that absolutely was not blocked at all by arrow fire, right? And especially if just by arrow fire, like if there was rest of other stopping infantry in the front, yes, its combined arms could have been like, okay, let's watch out before we charge into these guys, but just archers in front, no, right? And that was a hymn to the longbow that is not overrated as a weapon, but people exalt it in this sense in its tactical consequences in ways that properly they don't even understand. There is actually an astonishingly low asymmetry between, if any, because historically it's properly true. Some of the greatest actors think that there is not properly a response that the longbow was superior in collective use to the crossbow, depending on certain situations. Also because there is no encounter where you have actually the same amount of crossbowmen and longbowmen facing each other in the same conditions with a even terrain or something that can, through the sources, positively reconstruct how things actually went. Right, that's a myth that's being fabricated to essentially stress that it was about the longbow. Even in the broader picture, but surely the longbow had that dramatic capacities. Even if for a person with anti-technologistic prejudices, like me, I can say that the longbow did make those victories, but it was in a sense much more exchangeable than we think, given the broader odds of what these armies were confronting themselves by, that actually have virtually, like for any single factor taken out of the context, virtually insignificant for the outcome of battle itself, and especially when the comparison is rigged by dramatic numerical disproportion or things like those, right? You needed, for example, lots and lots of longbowmen to make that the effect of stopping cavalry together with infantry at a certain point. I mean, if you just look at the organic of English armies, but that picture had to make you believe that Longbowmen could just see, knights falling at their feet a few meters away just by targeting them with arrows. That's, for example, I would never allow a picture like that. Doesn't matter how beautiful it was, because it was colored, detailed, accurate in terms of equipment, etc. But the military logic of it is not there. It's not there, right? And it generates. But why is it not there? Like, is this something else? No, it's always about the myth that was a kind of a super weapon, right? So we all know factually that it wasn't, even if it was dramatically effective, contextualized in combined arms tactics, and that's evident. But of all the mistakes that you could do, surprise, surprise, in the picture you have the one that fuels the flatter, that kind of hyper spectacularization and evaluation of the longbow, right? So it's not a surprise, you see, and it's not a surprise for me, also because I even specifically study those contexts, and I can tell you that at Crécy, for example, the comparison with the crossbow is ridiculous, because the imbalance from so many standards was so difficult, even reconstructible in the actual ratios of strength, that you can't actually take that as. I remember, I think a Crécy volume or so. No, it was another book, and I remember it was Crécy, the Triumph of Longbow. No, it's not the Triumph of the Longbow. Crécy was a triumph of the English monarchy for the political cohesion and the long unitary tradition and administration, a professional system. What the fuck has to do with the longbow itself? Why do you have to title a book like that? People will laugh at your back as an incompetent person. So, you see, this is where we fail. As a civilization, this is not a matter of Osprey or authors or whatever. This is properly about the open admission that we can't be serious about things we should be serious about, right? And things like those. Another thing, reading Ospreys that I think it could be improved is, for example, this spring I've read, I think, 3 or 4 Command series volumes, and those were very good. Like, I was impressed by the fact that, I'd say now, this is essentially this Command series revolves around, it's a bit like a military biography of a given commander in history. And that's where, given these premises, I would say, this is probably where we're gonna see more, even though Osprey is generally objective and balanced, to say this is, if something is going to get wrong, it's probably going to get wrong here. I was wrong, actually, because they were exquisite military biographies. They were very balanced, very fair, very objective. They were naturally very compressed. You can't really talk about Ulysses Grant in whatever, what was that, 90 pages. And it surely made you understand a lot. But after having read it, I realized one thing, that if you don't know the mills, like, you see, I didn't choose that name by chance. Like, that was the guy who defeated the Confederacy, right, and properly gave the Union a broader political and strategical definition of objective that was the one to win the war, right? Just being an astonishing man individual in himself, just in war, because in life, as you know, he mostly failed in his endeavors. He was also probably very unlucky at some levels, and it's always fascinating to read biographies, and it shows in military history also as mental types what kind of people can, sometimes unexpectedly being good commanders, turning while maybe being complete failures in other activities. That's real, right? That's also why von Clausewitz teaches us very concretely how there is no positive way to say, oh, this guy's meant to be just a commander. You need to test him, right? And to test him at the highest levels is difficult, because you can't start a major war just for seeing that happen for sake of measuring. But in fact, we have history at a way more than abundant warfare to realize. And that's in fact what the whole Clausewitzian method is based on. And the point is that the biographical introduction broadly meant, I mean, the guy, the familiar background, the well, family story was very interesting. With the story with his wife, with his business, yeah. But when you have 90 pages, you can't condensate his military career in a few evaluations about certain situations that are surely are well described. I mean, this is the beauty of Osprey. If you read that, you have effectively the list of all the best and most, I mean, kind of the most important things he got in, and how, with reference, with an idea of what we're talking about, etc. But if you're going to measure the general's military capacity on the base of those examples, you can't do that in a synthesis, because you can at that point think that the reader is gonna buy what you're gonna tell him about that operation. But until you don't study that operation, you're basically just telling this guy, hey, look at me, this is a synthesis of, because I studied the thing and I tell you this, so this is what you should think about it. But you don't see it actually explained. You don't see properly from a strategic or tactical point of view what was the achievement in that action, if you haven't thoroughly studied. And of course, in that sense, you can pass to the specific Osprey volume on that battle, so you can better understand the thing. So it's obvious that you can't do it. But at the same time, even on, I don't know, World War II, volumes, major battles of the Second World War, they are very complex things, right? There are lots of forces involved, etc. So it's very difficult to follow the whole thing. But even with maps, even with some kind of, good synthesis and critical capacity, most of these accounts are just like a list of, like, in this village, this division fought against the other. But if you don't, and these guys were better because of this, and they made this and that. Yes, but if you don't picture constantly what was the entirety of the front in the area, if you're not constantly reminded how many troops these were, and if you don't picture the terrain, if you don't picture the place where they actually fought and what was the tactical problems, of course we also, there is a limit for doing that, right? But you can't quite get that experience for you to be able to autonomously criticize those operations, to reconstruct them. The only way to do that is naturally going back to the real sources, which is an astonishingly enormous work that most people simply can't do, because either they're specialists on that field, or they can't quite understand. But even a more, just if it was pictured better at every step, we would understand that. Right, but you can't approximate certain analysis given the amount of information that we actually have on them. I tell you that because even by reconstructing medieval battles, you realize that every source has something unique and rich to share as a perspective, properly as the way it says the thing, that you can grasp through the comparison through them what can be the most sensibly equilibrated and rational and logical military explanation for what happened. If you're just listening to a guy that makes you a list of the narrow engagements and you just follow him, and you don't even try, right? It becomes boring. At that point, I realized that I lose the plot, I lose the attention, because it's as if I was just being fed that information and there was no further deepening of the thing. And it's difficult to find a deepening on the thing there, because you would really have to go back to specialistic publishing. And this is not a criticism to Osprey, because once again, that's the format of it. It's just several tens of pages, not hundreds, and you can't digress too much on those specific aspects. But this is a memento, a warning to all those who think that by reading that stuff they can become militarily, historically competent in warfare. This is not how it happens. It's not by reading even all the thousands of Osprey that you will effectively become a specific expert in that field. It's not how it works. If you really want to acquire what that produces fundamentally is a series of hearsaying, because people first of all don't study this, right? Even if they studied the single Osprey booklets, they would immediately get a much greater military logical understanding, right? But most of these booklets are just read, first of all. Secondly, as we've seen, there is not comprehensive glue that keeps them together, right? There is not, like, you're not, just the authors that talk about similar things are different often. And there is no work on the source, so you don't factually know how to measure the thing yourself. So basically it's hearsay. It's you repeating what you've read in the book and building kind of an idea, as we've seen, on the basis of also on very specific topics, while others are fundamentally obscure and non-existent, and you can't like study, I don't know, a world war in that fashion, right? Because all things are intertwined. You can't dissect anatomically just one, the First World War, saying, okay, let's just study the Battle of Verdun out of any other context with minimal background, just to say, okay, now I know what Verdun was. Of course, you start from these bases and then you connect them yourself, but also you need a comprehensive understanding at that point of World War I at levels that there are, first of all, we're talking about monographies of hundreds of pages from people that are literally the greatest specialists and that write just academic stuff on that thing, that give you perspectives that in fact are always and dramatically and obviously more insightful than a synthesis, than a summary. So it's good, again, that people talk about history, but they should also be very careful in the terms in which they talk about that, because even the fact that, of course, people tend to buy probably the things they're already more interested in, and they kind of eliminate the rest, is not good. Like, you can't be an expert in the art of war if you basically stop only to a certain theater, and you have no analogic and comparative capacity to read and understand and reconstruct campaigns and battles of other times in history. That is to say, if you study for your entire life, I don't know, World War II for a reason of identity, religion, for wherever you come from, about that, and you literally didn't study anything, even about World War I, or I don't know, or the Vietnam War, or the 30 Years' War, or the Peloponnesian War, you factually do not have a military historical competence. You're just essentially talking about war, broadly speaking, but you don't understand effectively how war was waged concretely, and why World War II also, of course, was coming from a background that the world had never seen before. So also the challenges that were presented at that point were some of the greatest ones. In fact, they were the greatest ones of the history of warfare at that point. You can't properly understand without that perspective. So unavoidably, that qualitative capacity, and especially without a tactical, strategical analysis through these sources to reconstruct the whole theater step by step, will not provide you with that competence. And I'm sorry for that, because I realize that this is for experts in a sense, but experts are just normal people that happen to study those things for years and specialize in them, and so they're not aliens or superhuman beings. No, often, as I was saying before, they make mistakes themselves, right? And often for the same reasons, just on a different scale, that may be even worse in that sense for the broader misunderstanding, because also people there are going to repeat them. So all in all, I believe that there are really lots of things that could be improved, and I encourage people to buy the stuff, to read it carefully, to go back on bibliography, to know more, and especially, however, to understand that these are the products of a specific market, right? And the target is you, right? So you know, hopefully better what things should be like, right? But you do from a background that in maybe in the lack of that specific competence may not make you realize what the real issues with what is written there are, right? So I know that at the beginning you start collecting these things that you think as if they were individual treasures and so on. At the end of the day, what you should get down to is having kind of lots of them and constantly cross-referencing all this stuff. Whenever you need them, when you make a research on your own, right? It can be even, I don't know, as I was telling you before, I use Osprey, for example, also for making Schwerpunkt videos, right? I get the references from there, at least. It's not that I copy, I don't know, the concept that they wanted to convey in a, let's say, that's where I get the script. The problem is getting the single information they provide you with, understanding in which context it was expressed, on the basis of which evidence, which is not provided most of the time. So believe me, that's a real problem. And third, to combine it with lots of other evidence that you should have collected, in fact, in a, as I was saying before, also in an omnicomprehensive sense. That is to say, again, if you think that there is a dramatic difference between a Viking warrior and an Anglo-Saxon warrior, and that's what substantiates the clash between the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings in a broader, approximate sense, you've gone astray, right, from what you need to know about that context. So it's a vertical divide. You have to overlook the thing to realize that, and until you don't get there, it's difficult to do. And the only way is just working with this stuff, working with the sources independently, right, and using these books to essentially support you in the process, to get that quick reference what you can find. You see, in terms of categorization, Osprey is great because let's imagine there was no Osprey, right? Just to make you understand what this properly fits to, you would have essentially a bunch of much less easily available studies of hundreds of pages or even more that are written by people who naturally have made a research that is part of their life history, that is unique in its own kind, is not ordered, it's not categorized, meaning that it's a Lebenswerk that comes, in fact, once in a lifetime, and or maybe a few other books, but that are also different with targets, etc. So there is no standardization, categorization of some levels of average info that you want to give. There sometimes also specialistic, sometimes also, as we've seen, there are dramatically few people who I can tell you that make serious historical studies. At this point in history, the same scholarship is kind of fragmenting in a way, but even there without standards, and therefore it's a mess to reconstruct factually what's the status, the historiographical status. At this point, it can take years, right? It's quite frustrating. So let's assume you need to know to reconstruct the main characteristics of an army, right, and the main references to its employment, and etc. If you have Osprey, you wouldn't find it effectively, because you would have to read a book that also by the title can mean all and nothing, for finding no struggle, diluted info from the specific one that you needed to know to sort out certain things. Instead, with Osprey, you can simply know, okay, I'm searching for, I don't know, Polish armies of the early modern age. There is the title. I know I can find it there because I know they make things like that, and that's a topic they have covered. I can get there and get the references of the name of the units, their equipment, and the battles they were into, broadly speaking, how these armies were organized, how they politically were more or less mobilized, whatever. And therefore, already by that, you can get a skeleton that you can eventually fill with some other info that you can find through the text of bibliography, and or to other references just to certain names that you had never heard, maybe in Polish in that case, you go search for them on the internet, you find more information that you understand maybe it's gotten from, some series with its reference. So you begin like that, right? That, again, as I was saying before, this just, however, stops to that overall information. If you really want the deep stuff, you have to go for the greater books, actually trying to complete, not picking one, like hoping that that's the grail that will solve your eternal, your life problems. But in theory, you should search literally for everything that has been written from the beginning of historiography to today on that topic, studying it for years, and writing a thesis with a degree of pressure that makes you produce something in that sense, and producing something on your own, because at that point you will have hopefully been an expert on it. How many of us are willing to do it? Right, I'm trying to do it just because I do it by job. I already did it sometimes, but it's extenuating. It means literally a life choice. It means that for the next 3 years of your life, you have just to be devoted to that as a job, right? So it's obvious that it can't be done. But if the idea is that you're expert just because you've listened to Schwerpunkt on YouTube, or you've read Osprey, or you've found stuff on the internet, just know that you're not an expert, right? As harsh as it sounds. And it's for us, right? I'm an expert on my PhD topic, and that's it, right? For the rest, I have an idea because I make this general content on YouTube, and many people, I realize, come here think that there is some deep science behind it, but it's really maybe just habit to, sorting out, a certain amount of information at a time by exercise, by, in fact, comparative diachronic practice, exercise. And so with some acquired sensitivity, skill, ability that I got mostly through my own work and my own research, and that I can apply to by interpreting originally certain things. Right, in my videos I often say that usually if I have an opinion that is unverified, and I say by comparatively I can get the impression that maybe this context was in a certain way rather than another because of this and that I can formulate, and maybe it has some good, I hope, right, in it, and I tell you so that you can verify yourself at some point, maybe. Right, but really, believe me, serious stuff is serious stuff at levels that by most people's standards would be boring or incomprehensible, or simply, completely aside from what they think is like useful even in our world, right? And therefore that is simply because, again, they haven't gotten there yet, but again, they haven't gotten to mostly the problems of how you get there. And that's, I think, what history really is, right? And if you cut that, like in Osprey Publishing, because you have just to make a summary, well, thanks for those who make the summary, but you, while you read, don't think that's by reading that's enough for you to have acquired the competence of the people who have written it. Right, that's the point that I make. So I hope to have been clear about this, and I'm glad I could talk about it, because I realized that more or less when I come up with this more popular, if you want, topics, then like people respond because they had this experience as well, and they want to know more in a sense. And I try from my perspective to say it. Then maybe surely I'm wrong about many things. Myself, and I wish to know which ones, and more than else, always remember that history is not a matter of making a statement, and you can't pick whether that's right or wrong, right? It's like most comments you get, right? It's the critical ones. They're never like a broad historiographical, insightful criticism. It's just a guy says no, this thing is wrong, yes, and why, and the guy would never answer, because aside from the fact that they don't have they don't know what they're talking about, but also properly you understand that behind that there is mostly a simple motivation. That it's simple, meaning from a mathematical from a systemical point of view. It stops to problems like that are always the same. That people was there before, I don't know, that people had that genetic background. Yeah, without knowing the problems of ethnogenetic reconstruction and availability of material, because those people, you understand, they live within their own religion and they can't see that they use that by substituting it with a scientific method that is actually what would make them believe in something way more religious, in the sense of something that really makes society sticking together on the base of functional standards, right? So always remember that history is, it sounds banal, but it's always more complex than it seems, but way more complex, and also particularly complicated to sort out. That because we don't have today like a mean to sort out history, and the reason being simply that we don't have we don't have the dimension of of moral things. Like, we can't factually measure, I don't know, mathematically, I don't know, a political will, right? So that if you think that the war is a continuation of politics with other means, you understand that everything in terms of rigid, radical, deterministic, positivistic, technologistic, modernistic, whatever istic thing is in history is untenable. It's not real. It's not history. It's a lie that you need to believe in because it makes you feel better emotionally, but actually doesn't get you anywhere. Because without work, without thinking, without pain in this sense, you can't quite grow up as a mature individual. And history helps you to reason in these terms. So rather than picking whatever text, doesn't matter how good it is, and as we've seen, Osprey does have pretty good material, but you can't pick it as for your own self, like by your own moral standards, as this is where I can reasonably stop, right? Because of course there is an economical perspective in our lives where we know more or less what we can afford, what we can't, because everything is a balance. We have to be, to be concrete. We have to be pragmatic. I must give up something if I want something else, right? So I just have to balance that out from an economical point of view. It's like, how convenient is this, or not, more or less, etc. But always know that it doesn't stop there. That what you want at that point is not really a valid indicator of what you could have if you made the effort, right? And if you, instead of giving up, because the reason is how much morally driven you are. This is also the secret of the Clausewitzian theory. It all depends on how much you really want things, and the more you do, the more you learn, the more you're able to understand that you have to do more, that you can't quite stop to simply, a standard that you think is gonna work for your life forever, because that thing will go against you at some point, will backfire, right? And everything backfires in life, because at the end of the day we die. So it's not just a matter of aging, it's probably also all what we get in terms of pressure, of difficulties, of effort, etc. We are going to spend ourselves somewhere or another. So I'm sorry I put it this way, but we're always going to be overwhelmed in the end. Like, physics will win over us, unfortunately. But we have a quality that is a moral one that we don't even understand where it comes from, that science can't sort out, because it's as if we're sorting out, the concept of infinite, or what, and especially it can't sort out what difference it would make in practice to us, even to know things like having free will, or everything is to be intended deterministic, because factually that will not solve our problems. And that's what real history shows you, that you can't approach it through, like, I think that these guys were a bunch of idiots because they would have done better, because you don't even know what the hell that word was by scientific evidence. That's why we spend our entire life, our historians, to find out. And at the end of the day, we're lucky, we're happy if we can have, have added a tiny part, something that tells us, well, after all, that thing, you can never even dare be fully certain, but probably has some substance, right? But there is always room for improvement, and that will pass on to next generations, hopefully, right? So never stop to a standard, right? But also note that everything works, that you cannot be elitistic about saying, I don't read Osprey because, it's just bookless. It doesn't mean anything, right? It's just an act of ignorance, because if Osprey published so much stuff that, of course, some is bad, some is good, some is really very good, and it's getting better, especially because they've gotten better over time at it, and it's a good sign. So you actually should feel that. And that's the reason why I made this video as well. Alright, so for today I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.